All right, let's start. Hi, everybody. So excited to see you all. My name is Alice Hom. I'm the Director of Equity and Social Justice at NCG, and something seems to be happening on my computer. There's always a little glitch. I'm calling in from Ohlone land, also known as Oakland. And before we begin, I know folks are really excited. You know, it's 10:30. You might have had to before you had to kind of drive somewhere, but right now what I want to do is, do a little bit of embodiment. I really want us to have a moment to land and to settle and to be present in this conversation about operationalizing racial equity. So usually what we do at NCG and other meetings that I'm a part of, we have a minute of grounding. We also have done this practice at the Racial Equity Action Institute, which is known as REAI. And that helps us just kind of be present in the moment, know that we're going to be talking about racial equity. It brings up different kinds of emotions and feelings for folks, and that's okay. So I'm going to do a minute and just take some deep breaths. Maybe it's the first deep breaths of the day. Do some movement if you want. You can go off camera if you want. I'm going to start our minute of grounding right now. Okay, the timer went off. For some, that minute might have been the longest minute ever. For others, it might have been really short. It just depends on your mood of the day. I mentioned that I'm calling in from Ohlone land, also known as Oakland. We like to have a land acknowledgement, and also not just acknowledging the land that we're on, the indigenous land, but taking it into also action. So in the chat box, you'll probably see some links to Native Americans in philanthropy if you want to learn more about the work that they do. And particularly here, there's a nonprofit organization called Sogoreate Trust, and they also have a land tax. So if you're living in the Bay Area, you can, as an individual and as an organization, people have been paying a land tax for being on the indigenous land. So you can learn about that as well. I'm really excited to be here with you. Welcome to Operationalizing Racial Equity, Lessons from Multiple Sectors, from business, government, nonprofit, and philanthropy. We have some great speakers. Our speakers are alumni from the Racial Equity Action Institute, which we put on, NCG and SCG put on every year. And we'll also share some links about that because our applications are also open for the Racial Equity Action Institute. We're going to have 90 minutes to talk about operationalizing racial equity. 90 minutes is just not nearly enough. You're not going to get every answer answered. You're not going to get every question answered, but you're going to get inspired and you're going to get some tips and tools and hopefully some lessons learned about what you can do. Before we begin, I want to just say a little something about logistics. We're recording. Please keep yourself on mute. There are also some community guidelines that NCG follows. We meaning NCG's values include curiosity, courageousness, inclusiveness, joyfulness is also part of it. We want you to keep that in mind when we have our conversation today. What's the other thing? Today's presentation is sponsored by NCG and SoCal Grantmakers. So big ups for our organizations. And we just want to get a sense of who's in the room today. We have about 134 people who are here. We had 249 people register for this meeting, webinar. that means there's a lot of interest right now for this work. So I want to get a sense of who's in the room. Melissa, can you share the poll? The poll is going to ask, where's your organization at on a racial equity journey? And please choose the one that fits your organization. It's a little bit like a horse race. I see some people, some's kind of moving forward. Melissa, you let me know when we kind of get to a good majority. Right now, I see further along, which is kind of nice to see that people are further along on the racial equity journey. We're at 82%. Please chime in, folks. We want to get 100. Or at least get a sense of who all is here and what your journey has been. Let's do some more uptick. Let's get at least 90%. Right now we're at 88, 89. Oh, we hit the 90 mark. We're at 91. Let's maybe close it at 95. What do you think, Melissa?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Exciting. We're almost there.
Yep. And this operationalizing racial equity is not a race. Let me just say, it is not about who's the farthest. We're on this journey together. We recognize that people have their different pacings. That's why I did this moment and a minute of grounding. Like, it is not about rushing. I really want us to slow down when we do this. Melissa, why don't we just close the poll?
Yeah, 94%, very close.
Thank you so much for chiming in, and then let's see the results. Ah, nice. We have 19% as just starting, having conversations in an organization. 28% is emerging. There's some internal trainings that you're having. 10% is focused on external, but not internal. 45%, the majority of the people here are further along. You're doing something internal and external on racial equity. And about 3% don't know where to start. So welcome everybody who's been here. Melissa, you can stop sharing. And this is really great because we have a little bit of everybody on this journey. And I'm thinking that our conversation with our panelists will help us. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm very excited to bring them along because we had some great conversations to prep for this call. They have some great stories. As I mentioned, they're all alumni from the Racial Equity Action Institute that NCG and SCG are offering. We have Erwin Acox, who's the Director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Tides. Jaimi Cortes, who is a Senior Philanthropic Advisor at the Marin Community Foundation. Lisa Parson, who's Special Assistant to the City Manager for Equity and Community Recovery for the City of Santa Monica. And Kid Mintong, who's a partner and an Inclusion and Diversity Board member at Moss Adams. So, yay, you're all here. I just want to let you mention, mention that operationalizing racial equity is, as I said, it's not a race. It's focused on like 4 dimensions of race and racism. We look at it from the personal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. And you'll hear stories on all of those different dimensions. So I am going to look at my sheet and ask our panelists to introduce themselves with their name, title, organization, where you're calling from, and if you can answer the first question, how do your identities come into play in racial equity work? And I'm going to start off with Erwin. Erwin, kick us off.
Thanks, Alice. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Erwin Acox. I'm, again, the Director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Tides. We call it JEDI internally. Tides is a fiscal sponsor and nonprofit accelerator in now 17 states across the country. Our home is in San Francisco, and we also have another main office in New York City. So the question of how my personal identity comes into play. So I was actually born into a blended family, right? So I have 13 siblings, and I'm the only child that my mom and dad had together. They had previous marriages and marriages after. And so I grew up working in spaces where I had to manage different identities and the politics of that, and really create a sense of belonging for myself and for others, and advocate for myself and my younger siblings, because my older siblings didn't care. So I grew up in that. And I also grew up in Chicago, which, as many know, is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And I grew up in some not so nice areas. And so experiencing life at different socioeconomic levels really shaped me in different ways. And it's given me an acute awareness to justice and fairness and equity, and what that really looks like when you play it out in the world. And so that really seeded my commitment. And of course, I went through my career in different roles, played some larger roles in government around DEI. And this current role is kind of a dream come true for me. And so I will stop there, because we'll be sharing more in the discussion.
Jaimi, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Jaimi Cortez. My pronouns are she, her, calling in from coastal Miwok lands. I am a senior philanthropic advisor at the Marin Community Foundation. So I work with a portfolio of donors on what they want to accomplish with their charitable giving. I'm a cisgender, bicultural Mexican American, first-gen college student, and currently extremely overwhelmed mother to a 9-year-old, but she's great. And I would say, when we're talking about identities, honestly, I'm from Los Angeles, from the San Gabriel Valley. And so it really, I had the privilege of not really thinking about it until I moved to Marin 10 years ago. I can't even believe it's been a decade. But it was really a culture shock about the lack of diversity in our neighborhoods, you know, the different types of housing, the food, activities. It was something that I knew, raising a multiracial daughter here, that I have to try and make change for ourselves and others, especially as a white presenting Hispanic, where I walk in that privilege. I really feel I have a genuine responsibility to talk about race and race equity.
And Lisa, how about you?
Hi, everybody. Lisa Parson, calling from Tongva Lands, City of Santa Monica is where I work. The title's too long, so I'm not going to say it again because I'll use half the time. My identity shows up because I am the child of 2 Black outliers. My dad worked for State Department. He traveled internationally. He was first person in Peace Corps, broke lots of records, first in lots of things. My mom was also a really high achiever, led nonprofits, etc. What that meant was our family unit, my brothers and I, we lived in all white neighborhoods because my parents were successful. And so I've always been the minority in white spaces, but also have come to use that as a way to get in the room where decisions are being made and where things can be changed, right? If I know, I can definitely speak the language of the people, right? Because I grew up around them. And so I use that as an advantage to try to advance things in these majority white power spaces through my career. And certainly it's helped me through equity work. It's also challenging, right? I think I have one meeting where there's another Black person in the meeting and we're always like, oh, hi. So it's not without its challenges, but you know, that's where I'm coming from, is just knowing my parents did a lot. And so I started on a good spot, but you know, there's so much more that needs to be done. And I'm just trying to use what they set me up to do to get in those rooms and make those changes.
Thank you so much. And let's bring in Kidman.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Kid Mintong, he, him, his pronouns. I'm a partner with Moss Adams, as Alice has mentioned, and I have the privilege and honor of being on our firm's Inclusion and Diversity Board, which drives a lot of our work in racial equity and in this space as a corporate perspective. I'm calling from Berkeley, a learning land, and glad to be here today to kind of share about how, my identity, which is pretty unique, definitely different than Erwin, Lisa, and Jaimi, as I'm an LGBTQ first generation immigrant from Malaysia, which is a very multicultural Asian country, which a lot of different ethnicity and background of ethnic background. So a lot of my context of growing up in a multicultural Asian country kind of feeds into how I see the diversity in just what I'll call even the Asian population, because just because we are Asian doesn't mean we are all the same. And kind of looking through that lens, and together with my my other identity of being first generation and LGBTQ and whatnot, that kind of makes me focus a lot on what I call intersectionality of diversity and inclusion, because the intersectionality tends to have the biggest needs and the biggest impact that we can drive at as well. But it's also where we see a lot of commonality and coming together in kind of driving this work as well. So glad to share what we have done, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And I want to also share that operationalizing racial equity, there's the personal dimension, the interpersonal, the institutional, and structural. Sometimes organizations only stay in the first two. They stay in the personal and the interpersonal. They never want to touch institutional structural issues. And some reasons might be, oh, it's too political, or my business, we don't do that, or we can't touch that because, there's a law against this and that. And actually, there are some laws going on right now across the country. Like, you can't make white people feel uncomfortable, right? Like, that just kind of got passed. So there's definitely a structural and an institutional component. We're going to get into that. And I'm really interested in hearing from everybody about how did you operationalize racial equity in your own institution. So can you share a story about how that happened? What did it take? Give us some context. And I'm going to start us off with Lisa. And Lisa, you're from the government sector.
Yeah, so we started focusing on equity in the first job that I had with the city, which was working on a well-being index, which was a data-driven project. We collected a lot of data about residents, and then we disaggregated it by these key areas of life: community, health, place and planet, learning, economic opportunity, things like that. And when we looked at the data, Santa Monica, if you look at it, we're rich. Everybody's rich, right? But that's not true. But, we got a lot of very rich people. And so, median income, it says like $75,000. But we also have 72% renters in Santa Monica. So it's not the whole story. But we were sort of operating on that higher level story of like, we're a prosperous city by the beach. And then when we disaggregated those well-being index findings by race and ethnicity, the gaps were so clear by race and ethnicity. Every year we did it, right? They didn't really get better. And so from there, that was our first step into discussing equity as something the city was responsible for. And we had some early conversations where people would say, this is really new for me. I'm in government. Like, we're not supposed to talk about hot button issues. We're not supposed to talk about race. We're not supposed to talk about this. We had our city motto is like the city that works for everyone, right? That sounds so good, but what does that mean? How do you know? And it wasn't, right? So the first step we took was sending a cohort of staff to the Government Alliance on Race and Equity foundational one-year training. I was in that first year group. We started building more people from there, participating every year. So we did that for 3 years. Then we had COVID. And so then we stopped doing that. But then we pivoted, and we really were lucky to have an interim city manager who was previously working for the ACLU. So she came in ready to be like, you know what, if I'm going to do that, make some changes, right? And so from starting off as sort of a group of people who worked on their lunch breaks to try to advance policies or do this or that, we ended up now where we are. We have a formal racial equity committee. There's mandatory participation from each department. Everyone serves for 1 year. There are clear, goals that you have to complete. And it's a really good step forward, just because when you have good ideas, if you don't have the departments that are going to touch those ideas, you can't do them. So while first couple of years, we did advance some things and we did great in doing it on our side time. As we've now started to build this racial equity committee, we're really looking at how we can make the change faster, what we can do more deeply, and starting to bring it in front of our city council regularly so that we create the expectation with them that changes are happening and that they should be checking on the work. So that's sort of our journey. There's obviously lots more to say, but started just from looking at data, then it was like a volunteer project, and now we have a formal structure.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that story. And Kinman, how about you?
Yeah, I think the story for me is it's very similar to with Lisa. I think there's a lot of organic movement that becomes, institutionalized and whatnot. At Moss Adam, I would say that our impetus of kind of looking into exploring into racial equity and going into this work kind of started with a lot of our interest in and looking at our workforce and say, hey, we are not that diverse. Why are women leaving the firm? Why are the different groups leaving the firm? And this is, not just a firm issue, but it's an industry issue as well. So a lot of what we started was, we started with an initiative of Firm W that was many years ago, and then kind of creating a organic board of just leadership and saying that how can we help with recruiting, retention, and development of all our diverse individuals. But then in 5-6 years ago, it's when we truly have grassroots leaders have said throughout the firm that says, hey, I want to help create business resource group focusing on various spectrum of diversity. Then definitely we have one that's focused on racial equity as a whole. We have one that's focusing on Black employees. We have a Latinx and Asian American as well. But truly, I would say the operationalizing and really pushing forward on this work has been in 2020 with a lot that's going on with the murder of George Floyd and Stop AAPI Hate, and also being in pandemic and how all of us are just stuck at home and watching news and watching everything. And the impact and the toll was definitely strong and heavy, which activated the board. And activated the board to work with a lot of our BLG groups and creating a lot of what we call bold actions. One of the bold actions that I'm very proud of our firm being very clear to do is actually have the forward thinking and also being willing to be bold to say we want to be a firm that is anti-racist. Not just say we want a firm to support diversity or inclusion or be equitable, but we want to be a firm that's anti-racist. Being very clear, because we all know, that's the key word that we want to focus on. So being, that was one thing that we did. A lot of bold actions in being accountable, being helping everyone learn, helping everyone create at least a baseline education and learning, so that we can grow from that. So a lot of those are things that we will feed into our process, and I'll cover that later as well, but talking about how we keep people accountable, how do we continue this momentum, how do we become a role model and leader in our marketplace as a professional service firm in the corporate world, because that's truly important, because ultimately that's what we want to make sure that we represent our community, we represent what's the movement that's going on and how we contribute to that as well.
Great, thank you, Kinman. I just want to point out that both Lisa and Kinman have talked about things like, not just like, oh, we did this last year, that this has been happening over an amount of time. Kinman said like 5-6 years. I think Lisa, yours was 3 to 4 at least. So this is not like a 1-year project, an 18-month project. This is a lifelong project for your organization's, life cycle, which always goes up and down. And, when you leave, new people come in. So there's always change happening. So it's not like a one size fits all. And I just want to bring that up. And Jaimi, how about you?
Well, that's a great segue, Alice, because it's exactly sort of what, my journey was at the Marin Community Foundation. So I joined 3 years ago. And when I joined, we were not talking about DEI. We did have a programs department that did their community grant making focus on equity, but it was not ingrained in the organization. And for me, my job is donor centric. I don't have a formal role or capacity in working on DEI. And honestly, when I would bring up DEI, I was going against the status quo, and it was uncomfortable and it was scary. And I did receive some communication that it wasn't something that we were ready to talk about at that time. And I think we had a lot of people that believed in equity, but we didn't really know how to bring it forward and how to really talk about it. I also felt myself personally that I had imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to bring this up at this huge foundation as a mid-level staffer? And I don't have a lived experience as my other BIPOC friends. And so I think really joining the Racial Equity Action Institute, I really wanted to know more about how I can talk about race equity beyond DEI and how I could really lean into it. And the training did give me that knowledge and skills to put practices into action. And then I would say we have an internal advisory committee that is focused on DEI. They did provide some values for our foundation, but we weren't really knowing how to activate it, right? We wanted these values. We wanted courage and innovation and DEI, but when we looked at it, we started looking at it more as a project and an activity. And so we thought about, like, how do we embed it in our entire organization? Because that was not happening. And so just for example, we, as Kinman was saying, I mean, there was all these organizations and especially foundations were going through a racial reckoning, right? Of how do we do this work? How do we state what we're doing? And so we did create a DEI statement and talking about how to put it. Originally was a plain DEI statement, and we had to really push and advocate for it to be about race equity. We had to shift that. We had to have really uncomfortable conversations, especially with our CEO at that time. And we had to make sure that the wording was not diluted, but it really takes champions. It takes continual advocacy. It takes continual conversations. I would just say also, we have this DEI glossary that this team put together in July of 2021, but we hadn't shared it with our entire organization until last week, because we didn't know, are we doing this right? Are we making sure we're sharing it? We don't have a consultant on board. And there was a lot of hesitancy, but at some point we said, we have to do this. We have to make change. We have to take these baby steps. And maybe to some people that doesn't seem like real race equity work, but it's the little things and, that you learned to do. And we needed a shared language around race equity and DEI because everyone's version was different. And I would just say we have a long way to go because we have to incorporate it in our day-to-day and our actions. We have to be accountable. And we do have a new CEO that came on in September who is leading us in a strategic plan and discussing how to be an anti-racist organization. So I think we're really excited, but we have to make it actions and accountability, not just words. And that's really the work that has to be done.
Thanks, Jaimi. That's perfect. And Erwin, how about you at Tides?
Great, thanks, Alice. So I'll tell our journey story. So I joined Tides in July of 2017. A year or two before I started, there was a bit of a uprising of staff. Staff really wanted Tides to focus on integrating more people of color into their executive team. And it just wasn't happening for them. So they wrote a letter to our former CEO, really pushing her to do that. What came out of that effort was the creation of the role I was hired into, which was a senior HR manager, diversity and inclusion. And that role was really designed to get Tides off the ground with this DEI work. However, when I arrived, neither the CEO or the rest of the organization was really prepared to move the work in any kind of way. And so what I did was I spent my first year and a half really building authentic relationships with my colleagues to really start to understand the climate of the organization and what folks were experiencing. And that was transformative for me because it really challenged me as a practitioner. I had come from working in government, leading like a large scale effort that was mostly already in place when I joined the organization. And I had a team and everything working in different areas, and we worked across the whole state, leading programs and pushing for inclusion. So I come to Tides, much smaller organization, smaller operation, but grounded in social justice. So I thought this is a slam dunk. And once I got there, I realized how much work we actually needed to do. But what I saw there was a committed group of employees who really wanted to see change. And so in my first year and a half, so this is 2018, I was able to influence our former general counsel to launch a people and culture task force. And that allowed us to hear from every employee who worked at Tides during the time. And what came out of that effort was really some harsh realities that I knew were there, but our executive team didn't know was there. And it also led us to crafting this shared set of values, because we realized that folks were having a really challenging time in a culture that wasn't valuing DEI authentically. And so we learned a lot of how folks were experiencing Tides. And from that, we created this shared set of values that we continue to operationalize and live by now. Fast forward, the CEO transition. Previously, it was a all white led organization to now where 2/3 of our exec team is BIPOC folks from traditionally excluded identities. And our new leadership is really grounded in equity in all the ways. And so what I've learned just from going through REAI and working with these new leaders is that leadership matters. Our leaders and their commitment plays out like every day and every week at Tides. And it's really had me rethink how I approach the work, knowing that I have such committed partners who are willing to invest in me, invest in other Tidesters, and invest in the organization overall to really support me in operationalizing race equity. And I feel like we have a lot of work to do, but we've made some bold changes. One is we made a move to pay Tidesters who live in San Francisco a minimum living wage of $75,000. Now, this is a strong move that's life-changing for a person living in the Bay who may have been making like 50K. And so these are the actions that come from committed leadership. So I'm overly grateful to have our new CEO and that whole team really as partners in this work. And we've also partnered with a consultant who's really driving us and pushing us to think differently. And they're really taking a close look at how we operate, our practices, our policies, and our rituals to really ensure that, us just saying we're committed to JEDI is more than just words. And so I encourage anyone who's actually considering this work seriously, find a partner, find some committed leaders. I'm sorry to tell you, that's been a huge help for me, and it's really changed the game for me. And again, we still have a ways to go with firmly operationalizing it, but we're definitely on our way.
Thank you so much, Erwin. And what I'm appreciating from all the panelists right now, the reason why you're hearing from people in these different sectors is because we can't make change on our own. One sector is not going to change the world. We're going to need like different communities, different sectors, all working on this simultaneously, mutually, collectively to focus on racial equity. This is about organizational change, but as you just heard, organizational change is happening from the personal point of view, the interpersonal, the structural, and institutional, because we're all operate in a structural system. We have governments, we have laws, we have different, institutions, schooling, police force, et cetera. Like all these are impacting how we operationalize racial equity. So I just want to throw that in there. I heard leadership shared a couple of times from people, like one leader and then there's a new leader, or different staff became an ad hoc committee, can you talk about leadership? Like, what if you don't have a leader who's a champion? Or what if you you have a lot of staff who want to do this work, but a leader is like, not going to do it. What did you do? I think people on our audience might be in similar situations. So I'm going to throw that question to Kinmin.
Yeah, great question, and I think one of the key things is that in this journey of operationalizing racial equity and all the work in DEI, one of the things I've learned is that if there is no leader, somebody will always stand up. Somebody will always raise their hand and say, I want to get this done and whatnot. So the most important part then is just being able to creating an environment that is supportive of that. Creating a culture. I think Erwin kind of mentioned about culture and people and culture. And that's super important because if you create a culture where individuals who are within the different organization, be it corporation or government and whatnot, being able to say, hey, I have an idea about this. How can I do this? And being able to then support it and make it happen. And that takes a lot of empowering the people. And I'll give a very good example of within our firm Moss Adams that I'm very, very proud of is, our Latinx BRG was actually started by an intern asking a very simple question. She's Hispanic background. And she goes, why don't I have, is there a group that I can belong to? And my challenge to her was, do you want to help us get it started in your summer internship with us? And that's one thing that you're like, great, I'm all in. How can we get this done? So we got her introduced to other Latinx leaders around the firm, and within the year they were off and running, and now that same intern is now on her way out to be very successful in the firm as well, and that BRG has grown throughout the firm. So I see that as it's giving people access, encouraging folks, helping them find what's missing, what they need, and then feeding to it. But it's very important that leaders of other organizations and firms out there is committed to it, right? If you show examples of how you support it, if you show example of how you operationalize some of this, which essentially is all of our BRGs, that it started grassroots the same way, it encouraged them to always raise their hand and say, how can I help? How can I make movement? And that's so important because we, as leaders, we could pull them along and drag them along, but if the workforce and our employee groups are not all in and buy into it, it's going to be a very hard struggle with it as well. So that's my perspective. So
Great, thank you. And Lisa, how about you?
Yeah, so being in the government, our leadership changes a lot, right? Our city council changes a lot, perspectives change a lot, priorities. Every new city manager comes with their top, whatever it is that they're gonna change in the city. And so when we started doing the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, we basically only got to do it because it's a hard thing to say no to fully, right? Like, there's staff here, we want to make sure we're an equitable government. No, I don't care. That's hard to do. They didn't give us any support, right? We didn't get extra time on our schedules or our workloads lightened, but they were like, yes, we will fund you to go do this training. And honestly, I think they just thought that would be the end of it, that we would get this training and be happy. Instead, what we did, and largely because a group of us are not patient, we went fully strategic, right? We were like, all right, if it can't be fast, what are the strategies? How are we going to do this? And so an example of that is we decided to talk about creating a right to return policy for Santa Monica. The city had destroyed the only two Black neighborhoods in Santa Monica, one with the freeway and also a large portion of the Latinx community, one with the 10 freeway coming all the way to the beach, and the other with the city building a civic center right over there. Both the only neighborhoods of color. They were red zoned to be there, right? And then they were destroyed again by the city. And so we developed a policy. We went to the director of housing and we said, we really want to do this. We know you have no staff. We know you have no time. We will do it for you and we will hand it to you. Can we? Right? Which in this city, like that's the only way you could do stuff because everybody's like, I don't have capacity. I just don't have it. I care about it. It sounds important. I don't have capacity. So we said, well, we'll figure it out. So we met, 4 of us at lunches or after work or before work, and we developed this policy and we got it perfect. And it sat there. The city changed and we got new leadership and we said, here you go. And that leadership said, this is great. And a month ago, our right to return policy was announced. Within 4 days, we had 114 families of people who had been displaced out of Santa Monica that have already applied to say, well, this happened to my grandmother, this happened to this person, this happened to that person. And so honestly, it's a little bit of a package of like, if you don't have the leadership at the time, but you have good ideas, just develop them so that at some point they'll need something. And that's like my big thing is just being opportunistic, right? They're going to need something to point to at some point. And then you can be the one that says, look, you could do this. It's going to be really easy for you because it's basically already done. That's not the best way to do this work, right? Ideally, you're in a more supportive environment like where Erwin is in utopia. But in the non-utopia years, you can still get a lot done. That's my point, right? Like we also developed a language access program and we did that the same way. Like we started having meetings in the community and we said, these languages have to be bilingual. These meetings have to be bilingual. We're in our predominantly Latin community and everything's in English. And so we started out by making our PowerPoint presentations, 1 slide in English, 1 slide in English, 1 slide in Spanish, meaning like not 2 languages. If you were not bilingual, you needed assistive technology to understand what was going on. And by doing that and inviting city leadership to those meetings, and people were very, funky about it, like, oh, I don't need it, I speak English. And, I had the great time of being like, well, do you also speak Spanish? And they'd be like, no. I'd be like, well, then you need this. But in doing that, it helped them realize what it feels like to not feel confident that you understand what's happening. And when we started having those meetings, it built expectations in the community that the city would do this. And then we got a language access program funded smaller. And then the next year came and I was like, we should make it a lot bigger. And we got a little bit more money. And this year we're getting it bigger, right? And so for me, it's just strategy, right? You got to find some small thing and jump in and then wait for your opportunity to blow it up.
Lisa, thank you so much. I think what you're sharing with your story is, and what others too, all the pieces that you're all talking about, you're creating conditions for change to happen. You're changing the culture. You're normalizing talk about racial equity. You're normalizing people behaving perhaps differently. You're modeling different kinds of behavior. You learn that by maybe taking a training or by participating in, or like a program like the Racial Equity Action Institute, or NCG under Philanthropy California has Foundations of a Racial Equity series, where you actually have a moment to learn, listen, really have that embedded in you and think through. And so I'm really curious about how all this happens. And I noticed that there's a lot of questions in the chat too. And let's see what time it is. I'm definitely gonna give us, a time for that. But I'm gonna maybe move us to the question of what does it take to make change on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion in your institution? Like the path of it. Can you say just a little bit, and then we'll end and start with questions from the audience. But what does it take to make racial change, make change on racial equity, diversity, inclusion in your institution and maybe in your sector? Jaimi, I'm going to have you jump off.
Sure. Well, first, I want to give props to Erwin because that's amazing what Tides is doing. And I just wanted to highlight that. That's awesome. And this is why I love this cohort of the Racial Equity Action Institute, because we gather together monthly or now bi-monthly to really learn from each other and hearing what others are doing and how they're doing it. And we ask lots of emails about that too. So it's a great cohort. And so thanks, Erwin, for doing that. And I just want to go back to that question really quickly on and I think Lisa said it, but when you don't have the leadership, then what we're all saying, and I think we're trying to say is like, you can be that champion in your institution, right? So I always say this, where's that little piece of the puzzle where you have some agency and some knowledge and some space where you can make that change? Like, and I always present it as an opportunity to find a solution at your organization that benefits the organization, but advances equity as well. So it doesn't always have to feel like this big thing that you have to accomplish, but where are these little pieces that you can do? And as Lisa said, talk about it constantly, as I'm sure some of my colleagues on this call would say, yes, I talk about it constantly because I want to keep the conversation going and have the momentum, because you have to have the will to do this. And so I would say to your question, Alice, what does it take to make change at your institution? I think we've all heard this is not a linear path to race equity, right? It's a process. It can be a long process. And I would say sometimes I feel like you're never really satisfied because there's so much work to do and continue to do. And it can feel like an uphill battle. And I would say for us, one of the challenges we had was, I think I talked about that level setting. We really knew we needed some training, especially in our department as philanthropic advisors working with hundreds of donors. And so it took inside advocacy. It took multiple conversations to get a yes. It was not easy to get a yes to do the Foundations for Race Equity training. And it was a long commitment, but I would say it was extremely transformative and increased our knowledge base. It gave us the opportunity to have bolder conversations and to really think differently about our work altogether. And so now that we have that, we've really been thinking about and having open and hard conversations. They have to continue, and messy conversations. We are talking about how do we provide time and resources to this work. We don't have an equity position in our organization. We do this because, again, we want to do this and we feel like we're champions to this. And so we have to figure out ways to create a safe and inclusive workplace and also shift the patterns of inequities, right? And for many of our institutions, it takes allyship. You need to find others who you can do this work with and mobilize, because you can't do it all yourself. And sometimes you have to ask the higher ups to advocate, or your white colleagues to advocate, and really bring that issue, because it shouldn't always fall, especially on the BIPOC, your coworkers there. And I would say for our sector in philanthropy, many of us know we have this sort of perfectionist mindset. And so we aren't that open to taking risk or new innovative ideas. We've become complacent in this work because it's been successful, but to what end? And we have left people out. And so we need this transformation. And so does it take a leader on the ground? Yes. But when you don't have that, I think all the things I talked about, what you can do, I think targeted approaches to your outcomes, to your race equity outcomes. And REAI teaches you a lot about how to develop targeted outcomes. Training on these pro-equity tools of how you can change structures and policies and processes. Again, NCG has this great series that does that. And then I would say, lastly, in the sector that we all talk about a lot is how we're shifting power to those affected by the issues to solve in philanthropy. We really struggle with being donor-centric or maybe internal staff-centric, but we need to really have a new model, a way of thinking how to do that work.
Thanks, Jaimi. Erwin, I'm gonna bring you into the conversation about this. Maybe you could talk about the sector work, or how do you make change in your institution?
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about both. If you're really trying to make change in your organization, that's a personal commitment, right? As I shared earlier, when I came to Tides, they committed to hiring me, but didn't commit to actually doing the work, right? But I had a personal commitment to advancing change inside the organization. And one thing that really helped me was building those authentic relationships across the organization. What I've realized too is that really getting clear on the climate as it is in the present moment is really important. We have this will be since I've been there, this is our second climate assessment. The first one I mentioned was the people and culture listening tour. So now we have a partner who's taking us through a deeper climate assessment to see if the climate in the organization is even ready for this work. And that's an important thing to remember, because some orgs are just not ready, and you don't want to spend your time trying to push up against an organization that's not ready, because it's going to harm you the most. You're going to burn yourself out trying to turn a giant ship that's not ready to turn. You know, so I think you have to assess that as well. But the assessment piece is the jumping off point, because from that, you'll know where you are as an organization, and then you can start to use the different tools and practices that you've learned over time to really shift that culture. And REAI was major in that, really helping me get clear on the fact that this is not a linear process. And it really reaffirmed to me that some of the things that I was doing that were unstructured were actually the right things to do anyway. You know, so it's that moving away from having to have everything perfect and in a nice little bow and wrapped up, and really understanding that it's a personal transformation, right? It's an interpersonal transformation to then move into that institutional and more systemic transformation. And when it comes to the sector, I think more groups like REAI around the country to really educate all of us in the sector on how this work actually happens and what it means to actually live into the work and embody the work, to move from more of the talk about the work to more of the actions that come with really transforming our sector.
That's great. Thank you. And, you know, I'm going to bring other people and other voices in right now, and I'm going to do something that I wasn't planned, so I hope this is okay. And if you don't feel comfortable, there's a question, and I would love that person to unmute themselves and to ask the question, because there's a couple of questions that they asked, and maybe just kind of share it, and we'll see if any of our participants or myself can answer the question. Is it Cado Reyes? Asked the question. Cado, do you want to unmute yourself and chime in so we can hear different voices right now?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for hosting this. It's such an important conversation. I'm a donor services associate at the East Bay Community Foundation in Oakland. And, you know, we have a working group focused on racial equity and racial justice. And, you know, we're in the midst of some of what you have suggested. You know, getting a clear climate read and creating a safe space to just begin those conversations amongst our staff. But, you know, I think my questions are really just related to my musings on, you know, how this work is always initiated by staff of color. And I strongly feel that it is not equitable to volunteer like our skills and knowledge to make the case for operationalizing what we experience on a day-to-day basis, and trying to pitch that to fellow staff and leaders, you know. I was just hoping to hear some other suggestions for how to better ensure everyone understands this labor, like to acknowledge the labor and to better compensate staff for this work, which is really taxing. You know, some of you mentioned burnout, and or like how to center getting the board and leadership to really demonstrate that they're prioritizing and valuing, you know, and investing and practicing this, you know.
Yeah.
So thank you for hearing me out and adjusting your program a bit. Just let me ask that. Thank you, Alice.
Of course. And you know, if anybody, any speaker wants to answer that, I see Lisa, I'll say a little something too. I really appreciate the comment, because you brought in board and senior leadership. Sometimes the board and senior leadership might be majority white. And if they're not the ones who are, you know, speaking up, or they don't feel comfortable speaking up, they need to be trained in figuring out how to be that voice and speak up and have some experience. The other thing, I hear you totally, which is BIPOC people of color need to be compensated for this work. It shouldn't be additional work that you do just because, you know, you want to do it. And that takes some time because that's about, finances, budget, et cetera. That's why you have to bring everybody in. Racial equity is not like a program staff oriented thing. It is about every part of your institution, the HR, the admin, the finance folks. They have to be thinking this through. And that's a conversation that one can have. And unfortunately, sometimes it does land on the staff of color to do that. Other times it might be organizing your white staff colleagues and say, hey, we want to do this. This might land better if it comes from you. So think about your messenger. Who should be, or if there's somebody else who's in a position of authority, maybe you talk to them one-on-one to sort of bring this and carry the baton forward and talk. This is where relationships come into play. And that's what Erwin said. We have to be able to talk about this and have those kinds of relationships where you have allyship and somebody else moves it forward if they have different positional authority than you do. Lisa, you had a comment.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, we have two named positions that have equity in the name. They're both held by Black women. They were both created 2 years ago at this, basically within a week of each other, right? And so partially that's because we were both doing the work, right? And so in one way, that's great because we're actually recognized and acknowledged for doing the work. And there are a lot of people in my organization who might want to lead that work, who I don't want to lead that work, right? Because they're coming at it from a more transactional or a check the box kind of way or things like that. So we struggle a lot with the balance of wanting the people who are leading the work to have that lived experience, right? To make sure that it's, sensitive and open and infused with what these challenges are, and wanting, in our organization, especially white men, every meeting we're like, where is the white man? We have so many of them. They're never in these meetings. Where are they? Right. And so ally wise, what has been really great for us in the city is one of our now most robust affinity groups is our white anti-racist group. And what we found when that was founded was a lot of people who are white didn't feel like they should be in the conversations, right? They didn't feel like they should be taking space from other people, but they had a lot that they wanted to talk about and work through. And by having that affinity group, they then sort of built themselves up, right? Brought in education for themselves. And they are great, great allies to us now. And they are great supporters of the people who are leading the work and are also always asking, what can we do? How can we help? We'll step in and we'll step back whenever you need. But it's a long journey to get people to see how much work it is. One of the things that I really appreciated in my REAI experience was, I remember the first call and every call after that was rushing. I got on the call and they were like, you're probably tired. Take 5 minutes, get a glass of water, and we'll start in 5 minutes. And I didn't even, when you're doing this, you just run, trying to get everything done. And all of a sudden I was like, me? Take care of myself for 5 minutes? Oh. And in the fellowship, just talking with other people, it's very hard to do this. It's inspiring. I'm making great changes. I'm thrilled about every change I've been able to make. And it's very hard, right? And having a shared understanding of this is draining. How can we support each other? How do you invest in yourself? We had one session that was just about self-care in REAI. And I take things from that daily because you have to invest in yourself in order to move that work forward. And then in speaking to leadership, I highly rely on guilt. That's my personal strategy. And so I say to people all the time, listen, everyone's talking about systemic racism. We are literally the system. So if we are not doing something, it's not changing. People have to realize it's very easy to think of oh, the government before did the bad stuff. But if the government the now doesn't do the good stuff, then we're just the same as the people before. So I just try to use our sector and frame it in the way of we have the power to change this. You have the power to lead this whole organization. This is what it would take. And again, it's not as if I don't feel I've run across people who are racist largely. I work in Santa Monica. Certainly not in leadership. I don't feel I've ever run across anybody who says, oh, I think it's overhyped. Everybody says they don't have time. So then it becomes an issue of like, well, then you have to prioritize it, right? And so I just try to find every angle I can, again, back to strategy, because I'm not patient, to say to people, like, you have a role in this. We are a big impact on people's lives with what we do. And we have to do that. And it takes you. And unfortunately, a lot of times where we are now, and I think we've done a lot, I still get the question from like in a department head meeting or a leadership team meeting, what should we do? Right. And I look forward to the day where they don't ask me that. But I always have something to tell them every single time. I've always come with a list of things they can do, because that's the only way I feel you can really get leadership in. Like sometimes people just need to be told, and then eventually they'll own it. But don't be defeated if they don't know what to do, because if you tell them, they'll probably do it.
Thank you, Lisa. And you know, there's quite a few questions in the chat box, and I'm gonna actually see if Janae Oliver, if I'm hopefully I'm not butchering your name. Is it Janae Oliver wants to ask their question?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Janae Oliver. I'm a community health manager for Kaiser Permanente. And a lot of the work that I do is now sort of, you know, I'm being called upon to give input around our grant making practices at the regional level, and kind of coming up with a decision guide to make those changes. And also working in local medical centers to just rethink the way in which we've approached our business resource groups. So I've now been really entrenched in, it's a passion that I have around equity. And so I think because I am so passionate, what I wanted to kind of lift up is, you know, when you're that close to the work and you have a racialized or lived experience around race and racism, a lot of times you have a lot of ideas. I think, Lisa, you talked about this. Like, I come with ideas, and for me, it's easy, right? Like, I'm percolating all the time about, you know, ideating on the what ifs and, you know, the how. And so what I'm really thinking about is, how do you kind of make sure that you're not always, you know, coming with your own preconceived like mental maps and, you know, outcomes, and like really holding on to those? Because I think it's really easy to, you know, say, this is the pathway, this is the way that we should be doing things, but maybe there are other ways. And how do you not get tied to that and make sure that you yourself are also open to making sure that you're being inclusive and you know, forging the path, or like, you know, kind of coming up with a template, but not being really tied to it. So thank you.
Thanks, Janae. Any of our speakers want to touch upon that question?
I always want to talk, but I know Erwin has something he wants to say. I can see it right on his face.
I apologize. I was answering Claude's question in the chat. So, so I may have missed this question. So I'm gonna...
Okay, I get to talk again.
Yeah. Well, let me just see. Jaimi or Kidman, do you want to chime in with that question of, like, you know, what do you bring in terms of, is there making sure that you're not, you know, I don't want to say biased, but like you're kind of in a one way about certain things, and how do you bring in other voices or other models, or yeah, so something like alternatives to what you want to do around racial equity?
It's hard for me to respond. It's hard for me to respond because I have a bias towards equity that we talk about in our foundation and in our work. So, and Janae had a great question. I think thinking about it as business resource groups, which we don't have at our foundation, way to think about that. So I'll pass it on to someone else who might be better able to answer that.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. I mean, a lot of it is just, you know, constantly getting feedback from others who are involved. I mean, honestly, on our end, as part of REAI, we have been kind of getting feedback from each other as well. A little biased, yes, we have very similar mindset, but we still have very differing experience and perspective in how to approach it. So a lot of it, sometimes you might not be able to find others internally because of what you're doing, or sometimes it might feel isolated and whatnot, but tapping into a group like REAI or other network groups that you could find will help that. And part of it is just, you know, looking for individuals, reach out to us because we might know others in that industries or workspace or workplace that we could be like, hey, there's somebody else who's doing the same thing that you could tap into and get that, because we know it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of burden to carry, but you're not alone in this work that you do. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder, Kinman, about you're not alone. There's like 123 people still here. There was 250 people who have registered for this webinar meeting. You are not alone in this. Plenty of people have the same questions and desires, and we want to get there together. I'm going to do a moderator, facilitator. I'm going to, there's so many questions, and I think I'm just going to read them so that we can get them answered. So one question from Claude Robinson is, in what ways do you deal with staff members who've internalized racism? So folks who might have internalized racism.
Yeah, I tried to, thanks, Claude. That's a great question. Chi-Town, represent. Thank you. That's a great question. And I jumped in the chat as well as Sequoia, and it's true, like we're all at different places in our journey. And it really takes patience for those of us who know more and have a different understanding of this to really be patient with those who don't. And it's not it's kind of in some ways not our nature, especially in this work, because we're like, how can you not see this? Right? But another part of the work, right, is the healing aspect of the work and how we bring other folks along, particularly BIPOC folks, where we have to operate with even more patience and more care, because we know that this didn't just happen overnight. We're dealing with centuries of indoctrination into this way of life. And so that level of patience that's needed for that is probably like beyond anything we're accustomed to doing. But it's a necessity if we're going to sustain ourselves and if we're going to really move the work forward. We really just have to operate with some deep care and understand that we're all just at different places in our journey. And we all have internalized racism at the same time. So how do you kind of say, well, you have it more than me, and that's hard to measure, you know?
Yeah. Erwin, thank you so much for that. We're not trying to get into like, who's got more of what and like, an oppression Olympics or anything like that. We also want to offer compassion for ourselves, for like, we're still learning. I am still learning this stuff. I have expertise, but I don't want to say I'm an expert yet because there's still plenty more for me to learn and to know about. And we have to think about this structurally. Why weren't we taught this? All these bills that are going on right now about critical race theory. We can't talk about race. That right there is education. It is not just like, oh, an interpersonal thing they don't know. We're not being taught this. And sometimes people think that this shouldn't be taught in our institutions or organizations that we're in. So we have to think about that as well. So there's just like compounding layers to this. It is definitely an onion, and it's going to take time. So I want people to know this is going to take time. I'm going to go to the next question. This is from Jessica Roan. I'm working on equity team charter right now. Is there any element of that policy that you think would be especially important to have explicit, particularly around accountability and seeking external feedback? I think Jaimi and maybe Lisa have talked about accountability or explicitness around that.
Yeah, we, for when we built the Racial Equity Committee, several accountability measures were built into the structure. So the first thing was, I added the department heads have to approve the person who's participating and acknowledge that that person gets to dedicate 15% of their work hours to the Racial Equity Committee, which is not the same as having full-time positions, but does free up space for the person to actually be able to do the work. We also require that the department heads check in with their equity and inclusion officer once a month, one-on-ones. A lot of times these are people who never even meet with leadership because we try to diversify the participants. So, field staff from public works or what have you, they're now getting to meet with their department head once a month to talk about what they're working on. The committee reports out as required by the charter twice a year. on progress. So every 6 months, there's a progress report, happens in city council chambers. It's all for the public. And those are some of the things that we just built into the program to make sure that it is a program that is real, right? And not something that is a nice thing to talk about. People have dedicated time to do work. They have dedicated time with their leadership, and our top leadership hears about this every 6 months, whether they want to or not. It's on the agenda. And all of those things I think are good things to include.
Thank you, Lisa. Jaimi, do you have a quick second on that or no?
I would just say, I would say we're not there yet, but there is things that this learning from REAI was really about top level disaggregating data in all aspects, right? So how you disaggregate it internally and what you're doing externally, hiring, retention, client base, your beneficiaries, that should be one of the top things that's there.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Avani Patel. And just a little point of information, when people say REAI and you're kind of hearing, that's an acronym. REAI is an acronym and it means Racial Equity Action Institute, which is a specific multi-sector program that NCG created. And we partner with SCG to have this program available to you. The applications are open to you right now. That's the end of my little commercial. So going back to Avani Patel, have any of your organizations created some or sufficient space for colleagues to actually do the work, i.e. it becomes a part of your job description, you say no to other things? If so, how did you advocate effectively for these adjustments? Kidman, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add. Part of it is accountability of leadership to our employees group and whatnot. And part of it is just making sure that, hey, if this is roles that our individuals who are interested in this and want to contribute to it, that we need to set aside time, just like everything else they do. In our world, it's just like doing innovation. It's just like doing sales and marketing. It's just like doing learning and development. It's not any different. And we cannot see that, oh, this is extracurricular that you do after work and whatnot. So that has been a big shift and movement in how our leadership sees that. And the same way is on the accountability side, is making sure that they are being evaluated and considered in their work in this realm, right? Being appreciated, but also being valued for that as well. Not just as it's great for your resume or whatnot. So that's what we have done.
Great, thank you. And I'm gonna ask this question. This is from TC. How do we disrupt the paradigm of DEI work? Be calibrated for those who are in the emergent part of the learning spectrum. So I think that what that means is always kind of keeping people at this level when there might be others on different parts of their journey. So let's ask that one for right now. How do we disrupt the paradigm of DEI being calibrated for those who are in the emerging level? What about folks who are kind of further along? Or how do you get there? And I'll just answer too, since I'm not seeing an unmuted, but please unmute yourself from one of the speakers. Philanthropy California, of which SoCal Grantmakers, Northern California Grantmakers, and Catalyst of San Diego Imperial Counties, we have offered foundations of racial equity. And that's one way to kind of get people all on the same page about racial equity issues. There's a healing justice session. There's one about like the history of culture and of race and racism, political aspects. There's one about racial capitalism. There's one about racial equity and grant making. And there's another one about organizational change that Equity in the Center puts out. So that's just one way to kind of get people, instead of you always have to do that, like let them take that. Do that course, get that all done, and then you can start moving people a little further. So we want to we think of this as stages. This is the foundations of racial equity as one stage that might prime you to take the Racial Equity Action Institute, that might prime you to take another part 2 that we're also thinking of. So, this is not about everyone has to follow this linear process, but there can be stages that you take and different people can come in at whatever stage that they're willing to. So the other question from TC is, one request I'm seeing with my work with the board is a been there, done that with DEI. when they themselves really are struggling around DEI and won't acknowledge it. So I think there's just something about, they might talk it, but they can't handle it. That's how I'm going to interpret that. Are there any comments about that from our speakers? And I'm sure you have some.
Yeah, I do. You know, I work with politicians, right? So they absolutely, of course, what the city is built on diversity. It's one of our core values, right? And all I do is use it. I mean, that's all I can say, right? If you say that, then I'm going to follow up and say, did you know the National League of Cities has a racial equity training specifically for elected officials? And don't you think that you should complete that training so that you know, I think just always finding ways to make people's public facing brand, right, real. People don't want to say they don't care about it because I've already said they do care about it. But, you know, again, it comes back to the question earlier of like, it is me doing it and it'd be great if they were doing it. But sometimes I think you just have to find an opportunity to have people make that mean something, because everybody wants to say that they care about equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? In 2022, it's literally on your Starbucks cup. It's everywhere. And the levels of commitment that are underneath that vary so much. But I think you can always use a stated, you know, value as something that then you can build a foundation underneath it. And the other thing that Kinman had mentioned, you know, naming yourself as an anti-racist organization, sorry, whites, no one's anti-white, anti-racist organization, sets a big expectation for people, right? That we're going in a direction. In the city, like we're adding equity focused metrics to performance evaluations. That's been announced, but we're not going to do it for another 1.5 years because we're rolling out trainings to people so that there's the 2-part messaging always of like, this is the value. And if this is really what your value, this is what we should be doing. And this is not a gotcha, right? If you don't understand this, we're going to give you opportunities to learn about it. Because the goal is not to catch the bad people, it's to have no bad people. And so just building that in that's the key for me.
There's so many great quotes from today's session, you know, thank you so much. Jaimi, you went off mute, you want to answer something?
Sure. I mean, I wanted to answer a little bit about that, and where we talked about, someone said, where do you start? I mean, you just start with having conversations with your friends or email one of us about something that you heard, joining the cohort. But again, I think I said it a little, just find that little puzzle piece, like where can you make a change, and find other people that you can talk to about it, because it really could just be starting off creating a glossary, a DEI glossary at your organization. I mean, that's, I think, one of the parameters that we learned many times, to have that shared language. And then I would say about your organization, maybe leaders who can't handle the conversation. I think we've all been there. And I would say this cohort talked about it multiple times. And I think it is just, as Lisa said, lean into your values. Like DEI is one of our values. So I lean into it all the time. Like, well, you don't want to do this, but technically why not? Because DEI is one of our values. So it should be this. We are not there. It's going to take, as Alice said, this process can take anywhere from, 3 to 5 to 10 years. So depending on the way your organization shifts or what sector you're in, it could take even longer. And so you have to build in the resiliency, the self-care that we talked about, but also just know that it will take time, but you'll get more allies there.
Yeah, and I also want to share that it takes time, but it's not as if things are going to be stagnant. Change will be happening. It might be small change, but everything that you do is creating a new culture. You're creating, like, everything that we just said right now is like the tip of the iceberg, and underneath is so much more. But at that tip, you can make some kind of change. There's going to be some kind of evolving. People are evolving. Then you might have this interpersonal evolution, and then you might have some institutional, and they're not like one, like it's not one, like a personal first and interpersonal. They are happening simultaneously. So I want people to be thinking about this as like relationship building. Hey, asking people, what'd you have for lunch today? Oh, you had bitter melon and pork. Oh, where, so it could start at that level, and it can translate it to something else. And that all is about normalizing these conversations, normalizing behavior, And we want it to be towards racial equity, not normalizing bad behavior or sort of bad sort of comments. So I just want to, there's one more question. I know we're almost to time. This one is from Tonda Case. How do we do this work across generations? There are so many differences in understanding, experience, framing, and understanding that there are generational and make this work even more challenging. So I'm curious if there's something about generational work, intergenerational, could be about age, could be about other things. Any comments about that? And then we'll close.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think it's important to really try to build authentic relationships with folks across generations. That's what I've learned to do, really, and it just it helps you so much. Just get curious about people, ask them questions about themselves, have a virtual coffee with them, and just have a conversation. That's the best way I know to do it, and I've seen it work, and so I've been able to build a lot of trust across generations because I get curious, and then folks will ask you questions as well, and then you're building these relationships of folks who are willing to support the work even when you're not around. You know, they're doing the work, which is kind of, I have some cognitive dissonance around that because I want to be every place the work is happening, you know, but I can't. But it's great to know that people get inspired through our connection with one another, that they continue moving the work themselves in different ways.
Thank you. These last questions for everybody. Can you make it into like a thumbnail answer, if at all possible? What piece of advice do you want to leave folks with around racial equity? Like, do you have a little nugget that you want to share? Hey, think about this, or you want to leave folks with what? And Kid Min, why don't we kick it off to you?
I'll just say this one thing, and I think you all said it, is that you have a community of folks who are on this call that is your support system. So reach out to all of us. We'll be glad to kind of work together in wherever we can. And of course, REAI has been a great inspiration for all of us that continues to add value for all of us. So consider joining it.
Thank you. How about you, Jaimi?
Oh gosh, it's hard to bring it down. So as we've talked about, and that I learned through REAI, was really to bring your whole self, your true identities, the seen and the unseen, to the table, and acknowledge that, be open to the mistakes, be open to the conversations. And while you're doing that, you need to take care of yourself, your mental health, your body. We have great resources. I'm not good at that, but I still think it's something that we need to do. And lastly, I would say my greatest learning from REAI is the why we have to be race explicit, not exclusive, on why we're centering race. As a social construct, it has real consequences, and we need to know that you're doing your part. We are doing our part, and that's it.
Thank you. Lisa, pass it on to you.
Again, keep it really short. Keep a list of all your milestones. Progress is happening, right? Everybody on this call, you've made progress. I'm absolutely certain of it. But we're all impatient, and we all have such big change on our minds that it's so hard to hold on to the progress that you're making. So just like every time you get a win, we used to have a bright spot page on our wall, and every time something good happened, someone would be like, bright spot, we would write it down. But it's so important to go back and look at that and realize like you are doing something, like things are happening right now, so I would just encourage everybody to find a way to hold on to those, so that when you're like, this is never going to work, you can look at that and remember it's already working.
Oh, awesome. And Erwin, how about you?
That is one of the best nuggets of the day, Lisa. So I'll just add this piece. Be patient with yourselves. Take care of yourselves. This work is long, and it can be hard some days, and trying to your spirit. And so I would just say, get comfortable with things not being perfect. Get comfortable with really understanding that, you may feel like you're not that far along, but if you're even on this call or you're thinking about moving to work, you're pretty far along. So patience with yourself, take care of yourself, pick up some breathing practices, relax, enjoy the weekends.
Thank you so much. And for me, spaciousness is what we need, and not rushing. Like, think about, like, there was a quote, it's like, this can happen at the speed of trust. Trust takes time. You have to build trust. You have to be vulnerable to trust. You have to be able to share things. And that might not be, you know, comfortable for some folks. So you also have to get comfortable with discomfort. And for folks that means like, oh no, I don't like to feel that. We're like, you really have to feel that. And that might be one of the biggest learnings for this, that it's going to be uncomfortable for some, and it could be like second nature to others. And we have a lot to learn. So we're all still learning. I want to give, can everybody just kind of give big thanks, shake your hands in your Zoom box to Lisa Parson, Kid Mintong, Jaimi Cortez, Erwin Acox. I want to thank our co-sponsors, SoCal Grantmakers, the staff at Northern California Grantmakers, Sequoia Thompson, and Melissa Knott for helping with this. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to have a survey and a post email with the recording for you. There'll be some links that we want to share. In the chat, people are saying, so thank you so much. I'm glad, you know, we had some spaciousness here for this conversation. And I just really want to thank you all for being here and showing up, because that's a part of it, showing up for racial equity. So thank you so much. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes back. Yay. Appreciate your being here. Thank you, everybody. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Alice. Bye, Erwin. It's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much. Thanks, Alice.
Yep.
Bye,
We'll be in touch,
Jaimi.
everybody.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.